As we come into the afternoon, as we're working to the end of the day, we've heard fantastic speakers who are covering really the gamut of the integration of technology and how it impacts retirement. And we talked at the very beginning, we had a gentleman from Conning talking about this aging, population and how that's getting larger. We're going to the other end of the spectrum. So we're looking at GenX, and we're looking at Gen Z, and we're asking ourselves the question, what do they need to find them, fund them, and improve the experiences? So that's the focus of this panel. We would love to be, everybody to be engaged. There will be a QR code that goes up, and you can ask questions. I think the record has been 12 questions. If we beat 12, I'll buy in the bar afterwards. So we're not competitive here, but if we beat 12, we'll be drinking. So with that, I'd like to go through the panel and have everybody say where you're from and what your business is. Start with you, Dave. Okay.
I'm David Macchia. I'm from Well2K. I'm the founder of Well2K. Recently fired myself from management of that company and to focus more on the innovation. We started a small boutique inside the company called Well2K Innovation Lab, and I'm spending all of my time on imagining new ways to sell insurance and annuities.
I'm Allison Susko, and I'm with Asset Map. So certainly we consider ourselves to be retired tech, but on the fintech side as well. So I believe basically all technology has something to do with retired tech. And we focus heavily at Asset Map on having advisors talk better with their clients about their finances. So it's all visualized. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Asset Map. Put your hands up if you've seen it before. Oh, we've got some new in the audience. So we do tend to really focus in on allowing advisors to have a really open conversation with their clients and prospects about their finances using visualization, really trying to simplify the complex. And certainly that ties into that GenX demographic. So I'm excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Allison. And good afternoon, all. Sri Reddy with Principal Financial Group. I flew in from Des Moines, Iowa, which is where we're headquartered. If you're not familiar with Principal, we're in about 83 countries. We are a very large retirement services and employee benefits provider. I oversee individual and institutional retirement products. We'll look forward to discussion.
Thank you, Sri. Hello, everyone. My name is Farooq Sheikh. I lead the insurance businesses at Uncork. Very nice to meet everyone here and look forward to the conversation, Jonathan.
Okay, so let's start off with so how's the industry doing right now with addressing the Gen X, Gen Z?
So it's a difficult question for me to answer because for the last 20 years I've been focused on the older people, developing retirement income solutions for them. But I'll say this, I recently got very interested in it. And, there's a question, every day 10,000 people turn age what?
65.
11,000 a day turning 35.
Oh, wow.
So I fooled you. Recently, I think, let me put it this way. Sometimes in the past, we can find the answers for the future. Recently, we came up with an idea for creating a personal defined benefit plan funded by a flexible premium annuity with a management system that each year assesses how the performance of the annuity has been, sends an annual report to the client and says, you should adjust your premium by X dollars to stay on track for your lifetime income at age 65. What that really is an innovation that brings the defined benefit plan from yesterday down to the individual personal level. So that's something like that, I think, is, and actually that will hit the street with a company, an insurer called GBU Life, a fraternal company from Pennsylvania, in June, the first company that will come out with that. And we need more stuff like that. We need more innovation for helping these young people have a systematic, disciplined way to build wealth on a tax advantage basis and then turn that into a lifetime of secure, guaranteed income.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about these younger generations at Asset Map. Mainly, it started to come up really recently with having those folks come in with their aging parents, with their parents who are maybe just hitting retirement, and talking about that, in the context of maybe being beneficiary, someone who is an executor of a will, and then beginning to have those conversations with the younger generations about what they're actually doing for retirement, and having those conversations maybe even with junior advisors in the office to match them up, to kind of get that relationship going with someone else that might be more focused on their age group. And we're really seeing that, almost that family scenario. And we spend so much time talking about maybe that client and the spouse, but getting that entire family involved, especially from a technology perspective, and having the entire family understand even those aging parents' retirement situation is getting those conversations going with the younger generations as well, and having them think about how it might look differently and how they should kind of start to think about planning for it.
Yeah, and Jonathan, in the interest of time, I'm going to answer this maybe a little bit differently. First and foremost, generations are a useful classification mechanism. That's not how people identify. They identify based on education, socioeconomic status, position in life, things that have happened to you on your journey, and how you relate. So if you recognize that, mass customization, how we talk to people, is actually more important than trying to classify generations. That being said, I'm going to throw out a concept. One of the concepts that we've all sort of embraced is retirement is a real thing, right? And it seems like a real thing because we all talk about it. Social Security's been around for a long time. Truth of the matter is this concept of retirement is about 100 years old. Now, why is that? People did retire and didn't work and survive before that, but you count on families. This idea that you'd live for 20, 30 years is very, very new. And by that reason, why I'm inviting you to the debate is I do think how we view retirement is going to change. And so the solutions and our communication and our service have to change as well.
Great points. Just to build a little bit on some of the things that were said here, right? So generations are different, but they don't represent individuals. And if you look at the problem for Gen X and Gen Z, some of the problems that we have seen with retirement and funding across generations do persist. Education, I think Allison, you mentioned that, awareness, investments in guidance and so forth. But at the same time, what we're also seeing is that as Gen X and Gen Z come up, they're taking very different paths around understanding what the options are, leveraging technology, how they want to engage. So I think the problems we will face as a society in Gen X and Gen Z territory will be very different than what we used to deal with in other kind of retirement planning conversations, in the retirement readiness conversations. The education awareness threads will continue, but the shape they take will be different. The products, I think there were some comments on products need to be different, more active solutions maybe, and kind of we've seen that across the industry. So it's pretty interesting where the problem space is evolving very nicely with individuals and mass customization as technology becomes available. And I think the solution space needs to kind of take shape as well.
A lot of you have touched on this thing, which is marrying, I think, the event with the technology and having the right information at the right time. But it's also, it sounds like with a person involved. And we heard from the commissioner, right, the most important thing is don't forget the human in this whole equation. How do you see that coming together? Shri, I'm going to throw it at you. How do you see at the principal this marriage between human and technology, and how is that effectuated?
Yeah, I'll give you one that we are testing at the moment. It's not implemented, and we're going to pilot out later this year. When you dial in, many of you deal with customer service organizations that have IVRs or teleprompts, right? We're actually going to implement a solution that's going to be able to recognize the level of intensity, anxiety, et cetera, and the voice and tone, and you're going to get routed to a skill level based on the level of agitation that the system is going to hear. Now, why? Because the more agitated you are, you're probably going to need a more compassionate person to help you rather than just give you an answer. It's not to give less service, but people who are calling in who are calmer typically have a quick transaction anyway. So things like this can actually marry technology, drive better outcomes without necessarily increasing cost.
Right. So it's active listening, essentially, but using the technology to triage and to route things. But now that's very different, Allison, than what you're doing, right? You're approaching it in a more kind of human-centric way.
For sure. So we talk a lot about at AssetMap about it being a technology that supports advisors doing what they do best, which is the relationship with the client and the prospect. So we are not a technology that's going to demand 8 hours of data entry and 20 hours of building a plan. It really is meant to be quick, allowing you to service more clients, do what's best for a greater audience of your clients and prospects. So I do want to talk quickly about a poll because I think it directly speaks to even what the folks were talking about in the last panel, which is, what exactly are people looking for when it comes to technology? Do they want more human? Do they want more tech? What's the breakdown? And I will butcher this. I actually drew it. And if anybody's ever interested in seeing the real slide from J.D. Power, I can certainly share it. But it basically breaks down Gen X. No, I'll do it the other way. Boomers, Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Y. And it basically is saying, in the younger group, when it comes to service, planning, and advice, what do they want? Every single group across the board, from boomers to Gen Z, service, make it a little more digital. I don't need a human to walk me through maybe opening up a new, whatever different type of account it might be. But when it comes to planning, every single group ramps up needing a little bit more of the human advice. So even if that advisor is using a planning technology, which everybody is, they want a little bit more human. And when it comes to even jumping up more to advice, giving some advice on what they should actually be doing with things like their retirement, every single generation wants a human to actually walk them through it. So using technology to support it is super important, but depending on that kind of level of personalization, and especially when it comes to making a giant decision that's going to affect the rest of your life, they still want that human interaction.
And I think that's what Sri was bringing in, right? You have to mass customize for a specific situation. But let's talk about the product point of view. Now, how does the product interface and make it accessible to more people, right? Because we are trying to do a coverage gap, right? We're trying to make money, do well, but close the coverage gap in this way. So how does the product?
Let me try to weave both into it.
Yes.
When we come out with something new, like defined benefit annuity, we create what we call a learning center. A learning center is a high-end website personalized to a financial advisor that's different in the sense that it's stoked with proprietary marketing concepts, high-end video, beautiful graphic design, and digital humans. More than other people have spoken today, rightly or wrongly, I look at digital humans or AI as a threat to the physical advisor, to the human advisor. And so I believe that what's going to have to happen is that the human advisor is going to have to embrace AI, but in a way that's more than the business process automation or efficiencies, but rather, what is the client experience like? So when you first visit one of these learning centers, the first thing you're greeted with is a digital human who talks about the agent, who basically serves as kind of a third-party endorser of the agent. And all through the experience, there's digital humans that are talking about the concepts, the agent, over and over again, the financial advisor. And I think this is very important because we're not far away from true threats, AI-generated financial advisors. The technology is advancing so rapidly. When you confront in 2 years from now, an agent that is not human, but looks human, sounds human, talks human, emotes human, has the suppleness of human thinking, the subtleness of human thinking. We're not that far away from that, 2 or 3 years. And so I think financial advisors have to up the game, especially in the area of UX, and around any product that they want to sell, any product or concept. This is going to have to be something that's embraced and brought into it, in my opinion.
Okay, so Farouk, so you're a technology company, you're on the cutting edge, and I would suspect that you're, as a company, you interact with the top technical leaders, in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. What are you seeing, like David just threw down a gauntlet and said, hey, in 2 to 3 years, we're going to see, the singularity almost. But how do you see technology? What do you hear coming from Silicon Valley, and how does it relate to finding and funding and improving the experiences for Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z?
There's a lot of things where I would agree with David, right? Like in the sense that there are things that technology is providing or able to provide where you don't need the agent to do as much manual work, to do as much data gathering, to be able to mass customize. There's infrastructure that has been put in place both in terms of data that you can get on individuals, the life stages, the ability to pre-socialize, engage, experience, and the journey that different individuals at different life stages go through. The debate that's always there in the industry is whether technology is augmenting the human or replacing the human. And I'm very much, so far, everything we've seen is in the augmenting the human territory. Now, interestingly, to your point around the latest in Silicon Valley, it's generative AI and the latest round of AI has this kind of part which is cognitive, right? So they're trying to automate cognitive functions. And that's where people then again pick up the same topic of, is it replacing humans or augmenting humans? And I think very much across the board, what we are seeing is it's intended so far to use as a decision assist, right? The decision-making process where you have to go through that human element, the advice where you, to Allison's point, you need a higher bar of human relatability and so forth. Those functions are very critical, right? So you can, augment the human as much as you want, but you still need that human in the mix. At some point in the future, and even now today, right, like you can think about some small bits and pieces that can be automated. There have been many kind of investment applications and things like that that automate like tax loss harvesting, like specific functionality. But it's not replacing complex situations and advice that you need in that complex situation, plus the human element anyways, right? So yes, there's a lot more that will get digitized, augmented. I'm not yet sure that it will be in a situation where somebody can walk through their entire financial journey or their retirement journey without that human kind of in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, I often think about the quote from Bill Gates, right? Which is, you kind of overestimate what happens in 3 years, but you underestimate what happens in 10 years, right? So we are in the midst of a transition, and I think it's happening faster, and there's an acceleration component, and it's snowballing, and it's hard to know exactly where it's going to go, especially since a lot of the technology for Gen AI is open source and developed that way. I'm going to touch on a question that showed up, and it relates to the lifestyle. Sri, I'm going to pitch it over to you, which is, we've got a generation retiring, we've got a generation coming into the workforce, we've got a generation that's also hitting 35. More people are hitting 35 than are hitting 65. How do you bridge the conversation and between generations? So if a parent is approaching retirement age, do they bring in their children into that conversation? Is that unusual? Do you see that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the simple answer is no. And the reason that simple answer is no is this is not a topic. I'm going to back up because this is a perfect location. Las Vegas epitomizes what the U.S. was able to create. We're a country that eats as much as we can right now, right? When you invent the buffet, this is a goal. It's not to save and eat tomorrow. That's never been an objective. So if you recognize that, that's how we've been oriented. Now think about the marketing machine, the trillions of dollars that are spent around the globe, billions upon billions just on Super Bowl, telling you to buy things. This will buy you happiness, this will buy you health. I have an 11-year-old at home who walks around singing the Ozempic song. It scares the hell out of me, right? That's how much either she's watching TV or they're advertising. So the reason I'm starting there is the conversation is really, really hard, and people don't have it because they incorrectly believe, because of a shared relationship, the desires and wants are known. Most families can't even get agreement when they choose where to go out to eat, let alone what age you're going to retire, what you want to do in it, what freedoms and choices you hope to have. So something simple, and I've done this David and I, we partnered for almost 20 years, but 20 years ago, we launched, it was on a CD. Now we've digitized it and avatars are coming in. But something I've actually promoted in conversation through advisors is something called Create the Vision. How do you get couples to sit down first, have a piece of paper for each one of them and outline what they want and exchange it with one another? Because you may find out that the couples have never actually spoken, forget the children and the intergenerational compact.
All right, so that the last speakers, right, we had the 4 commissioners, and the commissioner from Wisconsin was saying, hey, great news, we've tried for a few years now, we have some education coming into the system. Are those education programs often done with carriers or with are you involved in creating these programs? Because I'm wondering exactly what is being taught to the generations that are coming up so that they can open up this dialogue.
I could take that for a minute from the tech perspective. There are a lot of universities and even and high schools, but let's start with universities who are really doubling down on financial planning programs, education for folks that want to get into financial services, and they are doing amazing work. Texas Tech, University of Wisconsin, Temple was brought up earlier. I mean, I think I was at eMoney for a long time as an employee, and at that point there was basically Texas Tech that was doing it, and now there's 24 3 that are doing an amazing job educating young folks on how to get into the industry and really hit the ground running when they end up either at an insurance BD, an RIA, wherever they decide to end up. And that being said, I think that's kind of morphing into allowing those folks to talk to people, even as their peers in their own generation on retirement and planning ahead and, thinking about what they should be doing with their 401k. Having plan participants actually get more involved with that person who is the quote-unquote advisor on the plan. So I do think that education is improving, whether it be, even those programs for folks that want to get into the industry, or even just loads of externship programs out there, foundations that are helping people get into the industry as young folks, that is then kind of snowballing and helping the younger generation. I'm seeing nothing but great things, and we support so many of those programs at AssetMap and believe really strongly in them because it's changing everything for the better.
So, I'm going to shift topics and say, what are the regulatory? Are there headwinds or are they tailwinds? David, I'll start with you.
In terms of technology?
Yeah, and in terms of really closing the protection gap, making sure people have retirement, starting the conversations earlier, thinking about where the products are, thinking about life stage. Is it a headwind or is it a tailwind?
I think it's a headwind, and especially in emerging technology. I think if anything holds it back, it will be regulation. It won't be the technology. The technology will outpace the regulation, in my view. But I think we have to put more effort into getting sort of a cohesive understanding between emerging technology and regulation. They were talking about it a bit in the last panel, but we have to do better. I want to go back to the previous observation that Sri made about families, because I had this conversation with myself yesterday. I have 24-year-old twins, and my son is pretty savvy with money. He's working for a tech company. My daughter is going to be a doctor, and she's working right now in Boston at a orthopedic practice as a medical assistant, and she's preparing, and she's going to be applying to medical school soon. My daughter has no concept of the value of money, none. Her mom discovered a charge on American Express got for $25 for Starbucks for a coffee that she had delivered. I said, okay, something's wrong with this picture. This is my life. Money, I have done a crappy job with my own daughter, right? So I was really...
I am very sorry to hear that.
So I have to work harder. But I think that's not that unusual in American families. We're just so focused on day-to-day living that we don't really dig into, some of the education that we have to. And it's not happening in the school systems, certainly at the younger ages. And I think that's where it should start. Anyway, true confessions.
All right, well, I'm going to come back to the regulatory. Sri.
So you asked about headwinds, and look, the truth is they're both in anything, right? Regulation, if it's uniform, it's meant to protect and actually fosters trust. It's not a bad thing. And I'll give you an example. It is easier to return items in the US than is almost any country in the world. Returns are a pain in the butt for retailers. Why do they do it? Because when you have the optionality of returning things, you buy more. You're not afraid to enter into the agreement. The same thing happens with our products and services. They're complex. They are for often a really long time. And people want to make sure they're okay before they check the box. At the same time, and I say this to regulators all the time, I served for 3 years at the Department of Labor on an advisory role, and one of the things I used to say to them was regulation is okay as long as it's uniform, it fosters adoption, and it doesn't prevent innovation. And that's a really hard crux to try to hit.
Yeah. Well, some of the thoughts here, right? Like if you think about how do you incentivize better retirement readiness, right? right? So you can mandate classes in school and so forth, but eventually, like the core part of it, as you enter your lifestyle and you enter your working lives and so forth, that's where you need some kind of incentive, right? Like at the end of the day, the main incentive is as long as you can have people start early, right, and save more. That's kind of the heart of the matter, especially in the generation that we're talking about. There were a couple of questions around like, hey, intergenerational wealth transfer, and when do you bring people into the conversation? Those are all a part of it. But at the very end of the day, how do you incentivize people to think about it early enough? How do you think about it from a active retirement saving perspective? How do you make sure that you can enable all the various pieces of the puzzle, like Social Security, like 401ks, all the various threads, right? And is there an incentive that you can provide from a regulatory perspective to simplify the management of your retirement life? It is complex. There's even with kind of the right incentives, it will remain complex. You can't take that bit out. But there's a question of how do you incentivize better retirement readiness, right? And that's kind of where I always think about, and like would love to get feedback from the group here. How can regulators incentivize better retirement readiness? There's a lot of mechanisms and focus on transitions and transfers and movement of assets and safeguards that you provide in the scope of those assets and that movement and life stages. But the main point to me is like, how do you incentivize retirement accumulation early enough? And we have seen that like healthcare and some of the changes in the healthcare industry have incentivized coverage and protection, right? Mandated it by law in some cases. So that's kind of the question in my mind, and would love, Sri, if you have something.
The one comment I was going to make is if there's already regulators in the room, your words and actions matter even when you use an example, right? So something that as an industry we've been trying to undo for now 15 years is default enrollment into retirement plans. We know that 3% is not enough savings to be saving, but that was an example provided 15 years ago and it stuck. I bet you if they provided a 7, 8, or even a 10% example, that may have stuck as well. So those things do matter, which is why little details go a long way.
As I heard Farouk, you were talking about it, one of the things that I was thinking about was the impact of work from home and how that, really, is that going to set us back? Just because people aren't even coming to the office. I mean, how do you have a dialogue? Like, how is training? It used to be, certainly when I entered the workforce, you showed up every morning. If you want to be promoted, you showed up early and you stayed late. And now you don't even come into the office sometimes. So, how do trends like work from home impact what's going to happen?
Well, even to tie back to what he just said and what you just said, how many times as a group of, if I think of a couple hundred people I was working with 10 or 15 years ago, people would walk around and ask each other, well, how much are you going to set aside in your I mean, literally, conversations would happen in the office about, peer conversations. What are you doing? Oh, maybe I can swing 6% too. I mean, that really is something that I think is missing. I could go on a whole tangent about, what's different with work from home versus being in an office, but it does tie into this as well, especially for people making decisions and maybe being on a Zoom with your plan participant, the person who's running your plan, versus in a conference room where you can, as a group, ask a bunch of questions and learn from that person. It's just a totally different environment.
Mm-hmm. David, do you want to comment on that?
I think that's a real thing. There's camaraderie is gone. But it's allegorical for the life insurance industry. I mean, the life insurance industry, became a manufacturing house and said, people, do your own thing, learn, train yourselves. Sort of, forsake that whole human development thing. And I think it's a problem. It's a problem for the industry. It's been historically a problem, and it's a problem that I don't see any real easy solution to.
As you look at kind of where we are and you think about where we're going to be in a decade, if we have this panel 10 years from now, will we be better off in 10 years or less? Well, I'll start with you, Allison.
I think better off. Like I said, I'm just seeing a lot of trends, and maybe because we focus so heavily at my company about, again, supporting the advisor with technology, not kind of that takeover, but improving the conversations using technology is kind of our whole focus, and facilitating conversation and taking down the barriers of what really freak people out, which a lot of times is, do I have enough money for retirement? Even, folks that are fully prepared, super sophisticated in their jobs, and really just like, top-notch clients, if they have any concern about making it or having enough, they shut down. So we really try to take down those barriers of the fear and the anxiety, and really allow the advisor to offer their best advice. I really believe that technology, and even some companies that you probably haven't even heard of that are new to the scene, everybody's seen that Michael Kitces map, right? Giant map of technology. There are some new companies that are making some big differences, so don't sleep on the companies you maybe haven't heard of yet that are really trying to advance what we're talking about today.
Sri?
Yeah. Look, life is going to be better. Why do I believe that? Because generally, optimism and hope for the future, while it seems sort of vain when you're in the moment, and I encourage you to try this at home. If you get newspapers and magazines, throw them in a drawer, don't read them for a week, pull them out, none of the headlines seem that bad. Because the world still moves on, we're still alive, and things are still happening. This is the same way I recognize at a macro level, the way the system is built, the way earnings accrete every year, the way investments are being made, we are going to be better off as a population. Does that mean they're not going to be imbalances? There absolutely will be, and that's going to be part of the social dialogue and discourse that happens. And that also doesn't mean at the very local individual level, some people are not going to be hurting, and some people are going to be doing much better off than they think. But I do think there's a lot of optimism. There's actually a series of questions, Jonathan, we didn't get to, but I'm going to throw this out there. There's a bunch of trending things on annuities. It's hard to address annuity questions from the stage. I've been around them a long time. I personally own 18 of them. So if you want to talk to me after the conversation, I'll hang around. We're talking about annuities then.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
So I was gonna suggest like a thought experiment, right? So this is like, pick your favorite or least favorite technology company or big disruptor, right? And they take over retirement. Just 10 years out, they've taken it over, they've figured it out, end of story, right? So just think about that world where you have I'm just going to use Google as an example, right? And I'll come back to some of the points made, right? So hey, you're going to spend something, you're going to consume something from the Super Bowl ad. Google stops you from doing so because they know enough about your payment history and your all these various things, right? Completely made up story, right? But there is a future somewhere where you can't control every human. You can't control the spendings, you can't control all the financial literacy outcomes. But with the amount of kind of focus and time and effort that's going into technology and to automate and simplify some of the experiences, being able to customize it to individuals and their situations, I do think that in 10 years' time, even if half of these things happen, we'll be in a very good place from a retirement readiness perspective. And just I'm not suggesting Google take over retirement. That's not what I'm suggesting. But just a company of some sort, Principal, for example, any company that really goes into this space with how do you serve the broadest market in the best way possible.
All right. So bring us home, David.
So I just want to say I'm optimistic and pessimistic. I'm pessimistic about the state of the middle class in the United States. It's under great stress, and it's not getting better. I'm optimistic about the youngest people. If you look at people 25 and under, 75 to 80% of them believe they'll never receive Social Security. So they're motivated to be more personally responsible for their finances, which I think is a healthy trend. So it's a mixed bag for me.
All right, well, with that, we're coming to an end. Any last questions from the audience? Well, good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.